The ambulance screamed down Highway 287, emergency lights cutting through Wyoming's morning mist. EMT Sarah Chen gripped the wheel as her radio crackled with updates from dispatch. Another call was waiting, a rancher with chest pains 30 miles south. Every second counted. Then she saw it. A massive German shepherd sat motionless in the center of the asphalt, ears alert, amber eyes locked directly on the approaching vehicle. Sarah hit the brakes, tires screeching against wet pavement. "What the hell?" her partner Mike Thompson muttered, reaching for the air horn. The dog didn't flinch, didn't move. It simply sat there with an intelligence that made Sarah's skin crawl. As the ambulance rolled to a complete stop just feet away, the shepherd stood, walked deliberately to Sarah's window and stared. In 20 years of emergency medicine, she'd never seen anything like it. The dog turned toward the dense forest and looked back, waiting. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Harold Whitman had always been a man of routine. At 68, the former railroad worker rose each morning at 5:30 sharp, just as he had for the past 43 years. His weathered hands would reach automatically for the coffee pot, muscle memory guiding him through the familiar ritual in his remote Wyoming cabin. But everything had changed 3 years ago when Martha lost her battle with cancer. The medical bills had drained their life savings, forcing Harold to mortgage the 40 acres of pristine wilderness they'd called home for decades. The treatments, the specialists, the experimental drugs, all of it had cost nearly $200,000. Money Harold didn't have but borrowed anyway. Martha was worth every penny, even if it meant he'd spend his remaining years struggling to keep the lights on. The loneliness was crushing. Martha had been his everything, his high school sweetheart, his partner through 4 decades of marriage, his anchor in a world that often felt too harsh to bear alone. Their only child, David, lived in Denver running his consulting business, visiting maybe twice a year and always with the same suggestion. "Dad, you need to think about assisted living. This place is too much for you." Harold's one source of joy had been Rex, a magnificent German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes and a coat of black and tan that gleamed in the sunlight. Martha had insisted on getting Rex as a therapy dog during her treatment, and the bond between the 3 of them had been immediate and profound. Rex seemed to understand Martha's pain, curling up beside her during the worst days, offering silent comfort when words failed. 2 years ago, everything fell apart completely. Harold had taken Rex on their usual hunting trip into the backcountry, a tradition that helped him feel connected to happier times. They'd been tracking deer near Devil's Canyon when Rex suddenly bolted, chasing what Harold assumed was a rabbit. Hours of searching turned into days. Harold spent his remaining savings on search and rescue teams, posted flyers throughout 3 counties, and walked the forest until his legs gave out. They found Rex's collar near a cliff edge, torn and bloody. Harold held that leather collar and wept like a child, convinced his loyal companion had fallen to his death trying to chase prey over the precipice. He'd held a small funeral in his backyard, burying the collar beneath a makeshift wooden cross. The depression that followed nearly killed him. Harold stopped maintaining the property, barely ate, and spent most days sitting by Rex's grave talking to empty air. David's visits became lectures about Harold's declining mental state, about the dangers of isolation, about the practical benefits of selling the land. Now Harold lived alone in a cabin that felt too quiet, too empty, surrounded by 40 acres of wilderness that held too many memories. His arthritic hands struggled with simple tasks. His fixed income barely covered utilities and medication, and some mornings he wondered if Martha and Rex were waiting for him somewhere better than this world of endless, echoing silence. Harold's boots crunched against the frost-covered grass as he made his way to the small wooden cross in his backyard. The October morning air bit at his cheeks, but he welcomed the sharp cold. It reminded him he was still alive, still breathing, even when some days he wondered why. "Morning, boy," he whispered, kneeling beside Rex's grave with a grunt of effort. His arthritic knees protested, but this daily ritual had become sacred to him. "Another day without you. Martha always said you'd outlive us both, you stubborn mutt." He traced the weathered letters he'd carved into the cross. Rex, faithful friend. The wood was gray now, aged by 2 Wyoming winters, but Harold kept it clean of snow and debris. It was the least he could do. A wave of dizziness washed over him as he stood, and Harold gripped the fence post for support. Probably just low blood sugar. He'd forgotten to eat breakfast again. Martha used to keep track of these things, made sure he took his medications on time, ate proper meals instead of cold beans from a can. "I should check the fence line today," he said aloud, a habit he'd developed since living alone. The sound of his own voice made the silence less oppressive. "That storm last week probably knocked some posts loose." He retrieved his walking stick from the porch, a gnarled piece of oak Martha had insisted he start using after a fall 2 years ago. The stick felt solid in his hands, a reminder of her practical love, always thinking ahead, always protecting him even now. The walk to the back 40 would do him good. Harold told himself this as he set off across the meadow, following the old deer trail that wound through stands of pine and aspen. The exercise might clear his head, shake off this strange fatigue that had been building all morning. Halfway to the fence line, the chest pain hit. It started as a tightness, like someone wrapping a band around his ribs and slowly tightening it. Harold stopped walking, leaning heavily on his stick as sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold air. The pain radiated down his left arm, sharp and unmistakable. "Not now," he gasped. "Not here." He was 2 miles from the cabin, farther than he'd walked in months. No cell service reached this far into the wilderness. He'd learned that the hard way when Martha needed emergency help, and he'd had to drive 15 minutes just to get a signal. The pain intensified, and Harold's vision blurred. He took another step forward, determined to make it back to the cabin, but his foot caught on a fallen log hidden beneath the tall grass. Time slowed as he pitched forward, his walking stick flying from his grasp, his body tumbling down the steep embankment toward Willow Creek below. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Harold lay motionless for several minutes, staring up at the gray sky through the canopy of trees, trying to assess the damage. His left ankle throbbed with a pain so intense it made him nauseous. When he tried to move it, white-hot agony shot up his leg. Broken. Definitely broken. He attempted to sit up, but the movement sent the world spinning. Something warm trickled down the side of his face, blood from where his head had struck a rock during the fall. The metallic taste filled his mouth, and fear settled in his stomach like a cold stone. "Help!" he called out, though he knew it was futile. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and the Hendersons were probably at work anyway. "Somebody help me!" His voice echoed off the rocks and faded into silence. A raven cawed somewhere overhead, the only response to his desperate plea. Harold closed his eyes and tried to think rationally. The embankment was 8 feet high, maybe 10. With a broken ankle and possible concussion, climbing out was impossible. The creek bed offered no easy exit, just steep walls of rock and root-tangled earth stretching in both directions. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher but provided little warmth in the shadow of the embankment. Harold's throat grew parched, and the cold seeped through his jacket into his bones. He tried calling for help periodically, but his voice grew weaker each time. As the afternoon wore on, darker thoughts crept in. Nobody would miss him for days, maybe weeks. David wasn't due for a visit until Thanksgiving. The mail carrier only came twice a week, and Harold rarely got anything important enough to warrant a welfare check. This is how it ends, he whispered to himself. Alone in a creek bed, just like I always feared. He thought about Martha, how she'd faced death with such courage and grace. She'd made him promise to keep living, to find reasons to smile even after she was gone. But what reason was there now? His son barely tolerated him. His body was failing, and his best friend lay buried beneath a wooden cross. The temperature began dropping as evening approached. Harold pulled his jacket tighter, but the thin fabric offered little protection against the Wyoming cold. He'd heard about hypothermia, how it made you sleepy, made death seem peaceful. Maybe that wouldn't be so bad. A rustling in the bushes above caught his attention. Probably a deer or elk coming to drink from the creek. Harold had seen plenty of wildlife over the years. Bears, mountain lions, coyotes. The thought of becoming food for scavengers should have terrified him, but exhaustion and pain had dulled his survival instincts. The rustling grew closer, accompanied by the soft pad of feet on leaves. Harold squinted up through the gathering dusk, expecting to see the silhouette of some forest creature against the darkening sky. Instead, he saw something impossible. A German shepherd stood at the edge of the embankment, looking down at him with familiar amber eyes. The dog's black and tan coat gleamed in the fading light, and there, just above the left eye, was a small scar Harold remembered from countless evenings spent scratching behind Rex's ears. Rex? The name came out as a croak, barely audible even to his own ears. Rex, is that really you? The dog's head tilted in that distinctive way Harold remembered so well, ears perked forward with intelligent attention. A soft whine escaped the animal's throat, the same sound Rex used to make when he sensed Harold was upset. "It can't be you," Harold whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I buried you. I held your collar. You fell off Devil's Canyon." But as the dog carefully picked its way down the embankment, moving with the same careful grace Rex had always possessed, Harold's disbelief began to crumble. This wasn't some random shepherd that happened to look similar. This was Rex, his Rex, approaching with cautious steps, nose extended to catch his scent. The dog reached the bottom of the embankment and padded over to where Harold lay. Without hesitation, the animal nuzzled Harold's outstretched hand, the familiar warmth and texture of his coat exactly as Harold remembered. "Oh, God!" Harold sobbed, running his fingers through the thick fur. How are you here?" Rex settled beside him, providing warmth against the growing cold. For 20 minutes they stayed like that. Man and dog reunited in the gathering darkness of a Wyoming evening. Harold felt a peace he hadn't experienced since Martha's death, a sense that maybe somehow everything would be all right. Then Rex's behavior changed. The dog became restless, standing and pacing in small circles. He looked toward the direction of the main highway, then back at Harold, whining with obvious distress. "What is it, boy?" Harold asked, though he thought he understood. Rex was torn between staying with his injured master and seeking help. The dog had always been smart, smarter than most people gave him credit for. Rex approached Harold one more time, licking his face with gentle strokes of his warm tongue. Then, with a final look that seemed to say, "Hold on," the dog bounded up the embankment and disappeared into the forest, heading toward Highway 287. Harold watched him go with a mixture of hope and despair. Even if Rex found the road, even if someone saw him, who would believe that a dog was trying to lead them to an injured man? People would assume he was just another stray looking for food or attention. But as the last light faded from the sky and the cold settled deeper into his bones, Harold clung to the impossible hope that his faithful companion, returned from whatever realm lay beyond death, might somehow bring salvation to this forgotten creek bed where time was running out. The German shepherd had been waiting by the roadside for over an hour when the ambulance's distinctive wail pierced the morning air. Rex, though Sarah Chen had no way of knowing his name, sat perfectly still as vehicle after vehicle passed by. Pickup trucks, hauling horse trailers, semis bound for Denver, even a sheriff's deputy had driven past without the dog showing the slightest interest. But the moment the ambulance crested the hill, Rex sprang into action with purpose that defied explanation. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she brought the vehicle to a complete stop. The dog hadn't moved from the center line, hadn't even flinched when the air brakes hissed. Instead, those intelligent amber eyes remained fixed on her through the windshield with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "This is insane," Mike muttered, reaching for the radio. "Dispatch Unit 47, we've got a situation here." "Large dog blocking Highway 287, mile marker 156. The radio crackled back. "Copy that, 47. Animal control is 40 minutes out. Can you clear the roadway?" Sarah studied the dog more carefully. She'd grown up on a ranch outside Cheyenne, had been around working dogs her entire life. This wasn't the behavior of a confused or frightened animal. The shepherd's posture radiated determination, intelligence, and something else. Desperation. "Look at his eyes, Mike," she said quietly. "When's the last time you saw a stray that maintained eye contact like that?" Mike Thompson had been an EMT for 15 years, had seen enough weird situations to fill a book, but this felt different. The dog wasn't aggressive. There was no growling, no raised hackles, no signs of disease or rabies. It simply sat there with an almost human expression of urgency. "We don't have time for this," Mike said, checking his watch. "The Hendricks Ranch is expecting us, and chest pains don't wait for dog psychology." Sarah tried the air horn again, a sharp blast that should have sent any normal animal running. The dog's ears twitched, but it remained motionless. If anything, its stare intensified, and Sarah could swear she saw frustration in those amber depths. "Okay, boy," she said, opening her door slowly. "Let's see what you want." The moment Sarah's boots hit the asphalt, the dog stood and took 3 deliberate steps toward the tree line. It stopped, looked back at her, and took 3 more steps. The pattern repeated. Advance, check, advance again, with mechanical precision. "Sarah, no!" Mike called from the passenger seat. "We are not following a random dog into the woods. That's how people end up on missing persons reports." But Sarah had already grabbed her medical kit and radio. Something about the animal's behavior triggered every instinct she'd developed in 8 years of emergency medicine. This wasn't random, this was purposeful. "Give me 20 minutes, she said, adjusting her radio to the emergency frequency. "If I'm not back, call for backup." "This is the stupidest thing you've ever done," Mike replied, but he was already gathering his own gear. And that's saying something. The dog waited until both EMTs were equipped, then began moving into the forest with the confidence of a guide who knew exactly where he was going. Sarah documented everything with her body camera, partly for protocol and partly because she knew no one would believe this story without evidence. The terrain was challenging. Steep slopes covered in loose shale, fallen logs that required careful navigation, thick stands of pine that blocked most of the morning light. But the dog never hesitated, never took a wrong turn, never looked back except to ensure they were following. "How does it know where it's going?" Mike panted as they climbed over a particularly large deadfall. "This isn't random wandering, this is navigation." Sarah had been wondering the same thing. The dog moved like it had walked this exact route many times, avoiding hazards that weren't immediately obvious, taking the most efficient path through difficult terrain. After 15 minutes of hiking, they'd covered nearly a mile of wilderness. Then she heard it. A weak voice calling from somewhere ahead. "Help! Please! Someone help me!" The dog's ears perked forward, and it bounded ahead toward a creek bed that Sarah couldn't see until they were almost on top of it. The embankment dropped away suddenly, revealing a narrow gorge carved by centuries of water flow. At the bottom, barely conscious and clearly hypothermic, lay an elderly man with silver hair and a face pale with shock and pain. "Dear God," Sarah breathed, immediately switching into professional mode. "Mike, get the rope from my pack." "We've got a victim down here." The dog had already scrambled down the embankment and was nuzzling the man's hand. Sarah could see the victim's lips moving, though she couldn't make out the words from her position above. "Sir, can you hear me?" she called down. "We're EMTs. Help is here." The man's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with obvious confusion. "Are you real?" he whispered. "Or am I dreaming?" "We're real, sir." "What's your name?" "Harold. Harold Whitman." "I've been here." "God, what time is it?" Sarah checked her watch. 9:47 a.m. Based on the man's condition and the fact that he was still conscious despite obvious exposure, he probably hadn't been down there more than 8 or 10 hours. Still dangerous, but survivable. "Harold, I'm Sarah, and this is Mike. We're going to get you out of here, but I need to ask, how did you end up down there?" "Felt chest pain. Couldn't climb out." Harold's words came in short bursts as Mike rappelled down with the medical kit. "Broke my ankle, I think. Hit my head." As Mike began his assessment, Sarah studied the dog that had led them here. The animal sat quietly beside Harold, occasionally licking his face but otherwise staying out of the way. The bond between them was obvious. This wasn't a chance encounter. "Harold, is this your dog?" she asked. Harold's eyes filled with tears. That's impossible. Rex died 2 years ago. I buried him myself." Sarah and Mike exchanged glances. The man was clearly disoriented, possibly concussed. Hypothermia could cause hallucinations, confusion about time and events, but the dog's behavior suggested a deep familiarity with this particular human. "Vitals are stable but weak," Mike reported. "Definite fracture of the left ankle, possible concussion, moderate hypothermia. We need to get him warm and immobilized before we move him." The extraction took 45 minutes. They had to call for additional rope and a helicopter evacuation due to the terrain. Throughout the entire process, the dog never left Harold's side, seeming to understand that the humans were there to help. As the helicopter lifted Harold toward Casper Regional Medical Center, Sarah watched the dog sitting at the edge of the landing zone. It made no attempt to follow or interfere, but its eyes never left the aircraft until it disappeared over the horizon. "In 20 years, Mike said, shaking his head as they hiked back to the ambulance, "I have never seen anything like that." Sarah nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead to the questions this incident would raise. How had the dog known to intercept their specific ambulance? How had it navigated directly to Harold's location through miles of wilderness? And why did Harold seem so convinced that his rescuer was a dog that had been dead for 2 years? As they reached the highway, Sarah looked back one more time. The dog was gone, vanished into the forest as mysteriously as it had appeared. But something told her this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something much more complicated and potentially heartbreaking than a simple wilderness rescue. The questions would have to wait, though. They still had a chest pain call at the Hendricks Ranch, and in the world of emergency medicine, the next crisis was always just a radio call away. The helicopter's rotors thundered overhead as Harold was rushed into Casper Regional Medical Center's trauma bay. Dr. Rebecca Martinez had seen her share of wilderness accidents in 15 years of emergency medicine, but something about this case felt different from the moment the paramedics began their radio report. 68-year-old male, found in creek bed after 8 hours of exposure, the flight medic had radioed. Compound fracture left ankle, possible stroke symptoms, moderate hypothermia. Patient claims he was led to safety by a deceased pet. Dr. Martinez raised an eyebrow at that last detail but focused on the immediate medical priorities. Harold's core temperature had dropped to 94 degrees. His blood pressure was dangerously low, and the ankle fracture would require immediate surgical intervention. "Get me warm saline, heating blankets, and Prep Or 3, she called to her team as Harold was wheeled through the automatic doors. "And someone call orthopedics. We're going to need Dr. Patterson down here." As the trauma team worked to stabilize Harold, Dr. Martinez noticed something unusual happening outside the emergency room windows. A large German shepherd had somehow gotten onto hospital grounds and was pacing back and forth in the parking lot, its attention focused entirely on the building. "Whose dog is that?" she asked a passing nurse. "No idea," replied Emma Rodriguez, a veteran nurse who'd worked the night shift for 10 years. "Security's been trying to catch it for the past hour, but it won't let anyone near. Just keeps walking around the building like it's looking for something." Inside the trauma bay, Harold drifted in and out of consciousness as the medical team worked. During his lucid moments, he kept asking about Rex, insisting that his dog had saved his life despite everyone's gentle explanations that he'd been found by EMTs responding to an unrelated call. "The dog that led us to him seemed to know exactly where to go," Sarah Chen had told Dr. Martinez during her report. "I've never seen animal behavior like that. It was almost like..." "Like what?" "Like it had been searching for him specifically." 2 hours later, Harold was stable enough for Dr. Martinez to conduct a proper interview. His ankle had been set and casted, his core temperature had returned to normal, and the CT scan showed no serious brain injury, just a mild concussion that explained some of his confusion. "Harold, I'm Dr. Martinez," she said, pulling up a chair beside his bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been run over by a freight train," Harold admitted with a weak smile. "But grateful to be alive. Is Rex okay? Did someone take care of him?" Dr. Martinez had been wondering how to approach this subject. The EMTs had described finding Harold with a German shepherd, but Harold's insistence that the dog was his deceased pet suggested possible psychological trauma or confusion from his ordeal. "Harold, the EMTs mentioned a dog was with you when they found you. Can you tell me about that?" Harold's eyes brightened despite his obvious exhaustion. "That was Rex, my German shepherd. I know how this sounds, Doc. But Rex died 2 years ago. I buried him myself after he fell off a cliff during a hunting trip. But it was him down in that creek bed. Same markings, same scar above his left eye, same way of tilting his head when he was concerned about something. Harold, traumatic experiences can sometimes cause our minds to..." "I know what you're thinking," Harold interrupted gently. "Old man, hit his head, probably hallucinating. But I've been around dogs my whole life, Doc. I know my Rex when I see him." Before Dr. Martinez could respond, Emma Rodriguez appeared in the doorway with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Dr. Martinez, you need to see this," she said. "That German shepherd outside. It's been sitting by the emergency room entrance for the past 3 hours. Won't move, won't eat, won't let anyone approach. But here's the weird part. Whenever Mr. Whitman's vital signs spike on the monitor, the dog starts pacing. When his stats stabilize, the dog sits back down." Dr. Martinez frowned. The nursing station monitors weren't visible from outside the building, and there was no way a dog could correlate Harold's medical condition with observable behavior. Yet Emma Rodriguez wasn't prone to flights of fancy. "That's impossible," Dr. Martinez said. "I thought so too, until I started timing it. Every single episode matches up perfectly. Dr. Chen from the day shift confirmed it. She's been watching for 2 hours. Harold struggled to sit up straighter in his bed. "That's Rex, all right. He always knew when I wasn't feeling well, even before I did. Martha used to say he was better than any medical equipment." Dr. Martinez felt torn between medical skepticism and growing curiosity. She'd heard stories about therapy animals and their uncanny ability to sense medical emergencies, but this situation defied conventional explanation. "Would you like to see the dog?" she asked Harold. "I could arrange for someone to bring it to the window." "More than anything," Harold replied, tears forming in his eyes. 20 minutes later, Tom Bradley from Animal Control arrived with a catchpole and a reluctant expression. He'd dealt with stray dogs for 8 years, but this case was giving him a headache. "I've never seen behavior like this," he told Dr. Martinez as they watched the German Shepherd through the lobby windows. "Dogs in perfect health, well-trained, obviously been cared for, but no collar, no microchip, and it won't leave hospital property. Normally I'd take it to the shelter, but what? But something about this feels wrong. That dog isn't lost. It's here on purpose." Dr. Martinez made a decision that would have seemed impossible 48 hours earlier. "Mr. Bradley, would you be willing to bring the dog to Mr. Whitman's window, just to see how they react to each other?" Tom nodded slowly. "If it helps figure out what's going on, I'm willing to try." The reunion, even through reinforced glass, was unmistakable. The moment the German Shepherd saw Harold propped up in his hospital bed, the animal began whining and pawing at the window. Harold pressed his palm against the glass, and the dog immediately placed its paw against the same spot on the opposite side. "Oh my God," whispered Emma Rodriguez, who had gathered with several other staff members to witness the scene. "Look at that connection." Harold was crying openly now, talking to the dog through the glass in a gentle, loving voice that left no doubt about their relationship. The German Shepherd's tail wagged furiously, and it kept trying to lick the window where Harold's face was visible. "I've seen a lot of things in my career," Tom Bradley said quietly, "but I've never seen a bond like that. Problem is, hospital policy strictly prohibits animals except for certified service dogs." Dr. Martinez was already thinking ahead to the phone calls she'd need to make, the policies she'd need to challenge. "What if we could arrange for temporary therapy animal certification?" "That takes weeks of paperwork and training," Tom replied. "And this dog doesn't belong to anyone, legally speaking." As if sensing the adults were discussing his fate, the German Shepherd suddenly sat down and fixed his amber eyes on Dr. Martinez with an expression of patient intelligence that made her deeply uncomfortable. And it was almost as if the animal understood every word and was waiting to see what she would decide. "There has to be a way," Harold said from his bed, his voice carrying a desperation that cut through all the medical protocols and legal complications. "I lost him once. I can't lose him again." The silence stretched as everyone in the room grappled with a situation that defied both policy and logic. Outside, the German Shepherd continued his vigil, as motionless and determined as a statue, waiting for the humans to figure out what he already knew, that some bonds transcend death, policy, and understanding. Dr. Martinez looked at Harold's face, saw the hope and love there, and made a decision that would change everything. "Let me make some phone calls. Maybe we can find a way to bend the rules just this once." As she walked toward her office, Dr. Martinez couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to become part of something much larger and more mysterious than a simple medical case. The questions were multiplying faster than the answers, and she had the unsettling suspicion that the most difficult challenges were still ahead. By evening, word of the miracle dog had spread beyond the hospital walls. Emma Rodriguez had posted a single photo on her personal Facebook page, Harold and the German Shepherd pressing their hands and paw against opposite sides of the window, with the caption, "Sometimes love finds a way." Within 6 hours, the post had been shared over 1,000 times. Local news reporter Janet Morrison arrived at Casper Regional just as the day shift was ending, her cameraman in tow and her producer already working on angles for the 11 o'clock broadcast. The story had everything viewers loved: elderly man in peril, loyal dog, mysterious circumstances, and a heartwarming reunion. "Dr. Martinez," Janet called out as she intercepted the physician in the parking lot. Janet Morrison, Channel 8 News. Can you tell us about the dog that allegedly saved Harold Whitman's life? Dr. Martinez paused, choosing her words carefully. I can confirm that Mr. Whitman was brought in suffering from exposure and traumatic injuries after being found in a remote location. A dog was present at the scene, yes. But is it true the dog led EMTs directly to Mr. Whitman's location and that it's been maintaining a vigil outside the hospital? Before Dr. Martinez could answer, Tom Bradley's voice cut through the evening air. That dog needs to be removed from hospital property immediately. This has gone on long enough. The animal control officer approached with obvious reluctance, his catch-pole in hand and his face grim with determination. Behind him walked David Whitman, Harold's son, who had driven up from Denver after receiving the hospital's notification call. "I'm David Whitman," he announced to the gathering crowd. "Harold Whitman is my father, and I'm here to make some things clear. First, that dog is not our family pet. Our dog Rex died 2 years ago. I saw the body myself. Second, my father is clearly suffering from confusion related to his injuries, and this circus needs to stop." David cut an imposing figure in his expensive suit and polished shoes, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. At 45, he had built a successful consulting business by solving problems efficiently and without sentiment. "My father is elderly. He's been living alone in isolation, and he's clearly not thinking rationally," David continued, addressing the news camera directly. "This fantasy about a dead dog returning from the grave is exactly why he needs professional care in a supervised environment." Dr. Martinez felt her protective instincts flare. "Mr. Whitman, your father is alert and oriented. His cognitive function is normal for someone who's experienced trauma. Doctor, with all due respect, you've known my father for 1 day. I've been dealing with his declining mental state for 2 years. Ever since Rex disappeared, he's been obsessed with the idea that the dog might somehow return." The German shepherd, as if understanding that his presence was being debated, stood up from his position by the entrance and walked directly to David. The dog sat down 3 feet away and fixed him with an unwavering stare that made everyone present uncomfortable. "See," David said, though his voice carried less conviction than before. "It's just a stray that probably smells food or is looking for attention. Dad's anthropomorphizing normal animal behavior because he wants to believe in something that isn't real." Tom Bradley stepped forward with his catch-pole extended. "Regardless of the family dynamics, hospital policy is clear. No unauthorized animals on the premises." The moment Tom moved toward the dog, everything changed. The German shepherd didn't growl or show aggression, but its body language shifted in a way that made every person present take a step backward. The animal's amber eyes never left Tom's face, and its message was unmistakably clear. "You will not remove me from this place." "Easy, boy," Tom said, his experience with difficult animals evident in his calm tone. "Nobody wants to hurt you. We just need to—" The dog suddenly bolted, not away from the hospital, but directly toward the emergency room entrance. The automatic doors slid open as the animal approached, and before anyone could react, the German shepherd was inside the building. "Code Gray, main lobby," the security alert echoed through the hospital's PA system. "Unauthorized animal in the building." By the time the humans reached the lobby, the dog had already navigated the maze of corridors and was sitting outside Harold's room, tail wagging as if nothing unusual had happened. 3 security guards stood nearby, unsure how to proceed with an animal that showed no signs of aggression but absolutely refused to be moved. "Rex!" Harold's voice carried from inside the room, filled with joy and relief. "I was wondering where you'd gone." David pushed past the security guards and entered his father's room, his frustration evident in every movement. "Dad, that is not Rex. Rex is dead. You're confused because of your injuries." Harold looked at his son with an expression of profound sadness. "David, I know what I buried 2 years ago, and I know what I see standing in that doorway right now." The German Shepherd had positioned himself perfectly to see into Harold's room while remaining in the hallway, a compromise that seemed designed to respect hospital rules while maintaining his vigil. His intelligent eyes moved between father and son as if following their conversation. "This has to stop," David said firmly. "Dad, I've been patient with your issues since Mom died, but this delusion is dangerous. You could have died out there today because you're not thinking clearly." "I could have died because I had chest pain and fell down an embankment," Harold replied quietly. "And I'm alive because Rex found help. Whether you believe that's possible doesn't change what happened." Dr. Martinez entered the room carrying a clipboard and an expression of professional neutrality that didn't quite hide her personal investment in the situation. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to address the elephant in the room, or in this case, the dog in the hallway." She turned to David. "Mr. Whitman, I understand your concerns about your father's mental state. However, all of our cognitive assessments indicate normal function for a man his age who's experienced recent trauma. His memories of events are consistent with the physical evidence we found." "What physical evidence?" David demanded. "Your father's injuries are consistent with a fall from height followed by prolonged exposure. The location where he was found suggests he was trying to return home when the incident occurred. Most importantly, the EMTs who found him report that a dog led them directly to his location through terrain that would have been impossible to search systematically." David's skepticism was evident in his voice. "And you believe this dog somehow knew where to find rescue workers?" "I believe the dog displayed behavior that can't be easily explained," Dr. Martinez replied carefully. "Whether that behavior was instinctual, trained, or something else entirely isn't for me to determine. What matters medically is that your father is recovering well and shows no signs of psychological impairment." In the hallway, the German Shepherd had attracted a small crowd of hospital staff and visitors. Several nurses were offering him water and treats, which he politely refused while never taking his attention away from Harold's room. "There's something else you should know, Dr." Martinez continued, consulting her clipboard. "We've had inquiries from 3 different news stations, 2 newspapers, and someone from a national morning show. This story is gaining attention beyond our local area." David's expression darkened. "Publicity is the last thing Dad needs right now. He requires privacy, medical care, and realistic expectations about his future." "What I require," Harold said from his hospital bed, his voice carrying surprising strength, "is to be reunited with my dog. I don't care if that makes sense to anyone else." The standoff continued as evening deepened into night. The German Shepherd maintained his position in the hallway. Hospital staff debated policy exceptions. David made phone calls to lawyers and assisted living facilities, and Harold lay in his bed growing more agitated as the arguments swirled around him. At 9:47 p.m., exactly 12 hours after Harold had been rescued from the creek bed, his heart monitor began alarming. The stress of the day, combined with his injuries and the emotional turmoil of the reunion and subsequent separation from the dog, had pushed his cardiovascular system beyond its limits. Dr. Martinez rushed into the room as Harold clutched his chest, his face pale and his breathing labored. "Mr. Whitman, stay calm. We're going to take care of you." In the hallway, the German Shepherd began whining and pacing with obvious distress. As Harold's condition worsened, the dog's agitation increased proportionally, creating an eerie correlation that none of the medical staff could ignore. "Get him to cardiac," Dr. Martinez ordered as the crash team assembled. "And someone please do something about that dog before he goes crazy." But as they wheeled Harold toward the cardiac unit, something remarkable happened. The German Shepherd fell into step beside the gurney, matching their pace perfectly and showing no sign of interfering with the medical team's work. When they reached the cardiac unit's restricted access doors, the dog sat down and resumed his patient vigil as if understanding that this was as far as he could go. The crisis had elevated the situation beyond questions of policy or family disputes. Now it was a matter of life and death, and everyone involved was about to discover just how far love and loyalty could push the boundaries of what seemed possible. Harold's cardiac episode proved more serious than initially thought. The electrocardiogram revealed irregular rhythms that suggested his heart had been under strain for much longer than the single day since his rescue. Dr. Martinez ordered a full cardiac workup, including blood work that would take hours to process, and made the difficult decision to place Harold in the intensive care unit for observation. "His troponin levels are elevated," she explained to David as they stood outside the ICU. "That indicates recent heart muscle damage. Combined with his age and the stress of his ordeal, we're looking at a potentially life-threatening situation." David paced the hallway, his earlier confidence replaced by obvious anxiety. "What are his chances? The next 24 hours will be critical." "We're doing everything we can, but at his age, his body's ability to recover from this kind of stress is limited." Through the ICU's reinforced windows, Harold lay connected to a maze of monitors and IV lines, his breathing assisted by oxygen cannula. The constant beeping of machines created a rhythm that seemed to echo through the entire unit, a mechanical heartbeat that measured time in increasingly precious increments. Outside in the main corridor, the German Shepherd had positioned himself as close to the ICU as hospital security would allow. Tom Bradley had tried repeatedly to remove the animal, but each attempt resulted in such obvious distress, not just from the dog but from Harold's vital signs, that the staff had reluctantly agreed to let him stay. "This is getting out of hand," David said, watching the dog through the lobby windows. "Now we have news crews camping in the parking lot, people bringing flowers and dog treats, and my father is apparently having heart problems triggered by emotional stress over an animal that isn't even ours." Dr. Martinez had been thinking about the same problem. The situation had evolved beyond a simple medical case into something that was attracting national attention. Her phone had been ringing constantly with interview requests, and hospital administration was growing concerned about the media circus developing on their property. "Mr. Whitman, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer," she said. "Your father's stress levels are clearly elevated by the uncertainty surrounding this dog. Is there any possibility, any at all, that this could actually be your family's pet?" David's expression hardened. "Doctor, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but false hope isn't going to help anyone. Rex fell off a cliff 2 years ago. I saw his body myself before we buried him." "You saw the body?" "Well, not exactly," David admitted reluctantly. "We found his collar near the cliff edge, torn and bloody. Dad was so distraught that I handled the arrangements. I buried the collar in our backyard and told Dad it was Rex." Dr. Martinez felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You buried an empty collar? What was I supposed to do?" "Dad was falling apart, spending every penny we had on search and rescue teams. I needed him to accept reality and move on." The revelation hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Dr. Martinez stared at David with growing understanding and growing disgust. "So you never actually found Rex's body? The cliff is 200 feet high, and there are rapids at the bottom. Nothing could have survived that fall, and even if it had, the current would have carried the body miles downstream. I made a practical decision based on evidence. Evidence that led you to lie to your grieving father about burying his dog." David's face flushed with anger. "I was protecting him from false hope. Dad was spending our inheritance on a hopeless search, neglecting his health, talking about nothing but that damn dog. Someone had to be the adult in the situation." Dr. Martinez walked away without another word, her mind racing with implications. If Rex had never actually died, if David had simply assumed the worst and covered up his assumption with a lie, then everything changed. The dog's knowledge of Harold's location, his obvious familiarity with hospital routines, his apparent emotional connection to Harold's medical condition, none of it would be impossible anymore. She found Emma Rodriguez updating charts at the nursing station. "Emma, I need you to contact Animal Control and ask them to run a more comprehensive check on that dog. Not just microchips, I want them to contact veterinary offices, groomers, anywhere that might have records." "You think he might actually be the family dog?" "I think we've been operating under an assumption that might be completely wrong." While Emma made the calls, Dr. Martinez returned to Harold's bedside. His condition had stabilized somewhat, but the cardiac monitors showed continued irregularities that worried her. His eyes fluttered open as she approached. "Doc," he whispered, his voice weak but alert. "Is Rex okay? I can feel that he's upset about something." Dr. Martinez chose her words carefully. "Harold, the dog is fine. He's waiting for you right outside the ICU. But I need to ask you something important. When Rex disappeared 2 years ago, did you ever find his body?" Harold's eyes focused with surprising clarity. "No, David said he found him, said he'd taken care of the burial because I was too upset. But I always wondered, Rex was such a smart dog, such a survivor. Part of me never believed he was really gone. What if I told you he might not be?" Hope flickered in Harold's eyes, followed immediately by fear. "Don't do that to me, Doc. I can't go through losing him again." Before Dr. Martinez could respond, Emma Rodriguez appeared in the doorway with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Dr. Martinez, you need to hear this. I talked to Dr. Sarah Kim at Riverside Veterinary Clinic. She remembers treating a German Shepherd about 18 months ago, brought in by a family named Henderson who'd found him wandering near their ranch about 50 miles from here." Dr. Martinez felt her heart rate accelerate. "Go on." "The dog was malnourished, had some old injuries consistent with a fall, but was otherwise healthy. Dr. Kim said he was obviously well-trained, probably someone's beloved pet, but he had no identification. The Hendersons adopted him, called him Duke." 18 months ago, Harold whispered from his bed. 6 months after Rex disappeared. Emma continued, "Here's the interesting part. Dr. Kim said Duke never really bonded with the Henderson family. He was polite but distant, like he was waiting for something. 3 months ago, he disappeared from their ranch. They assumed he'd been killed by wildlife or hit by a car. The timeline was starting to make sense. Rex had survived his fall, lived wild for months before being rescued by the Hendersons, spent over a year in their care, then escaped and spent months finding his way back to Harold's area. The dedication and intelligence required for such a journey defied everything most people believed about animal capabilities. "There's more," Emma said, consulting her notes. "Dr. Kim still has the X-rays from Duke's treatment. If this dog really is Rex, your father would have veterinary records that would show the same bone structure, any old fractures or identifying marks." Harold struggled to sit up straighter. "Rex broke his front leg when he was a puppy. Fell out of my pickup truck. The vet said it healed perfectly, but there would always be a slight irregularity in the bone." Dr. Martinez made a decision that would have seemed impossible 24 hours earlier. "Emma, call Dr. Kim and ask her to email those X-rays immediately. Then call the Hendersons and get their story firsthand." As Emma hurried away to make the calls, Harold reached out and grasped Dr. Martinez's hand with surprising strength. "If it's really him, if Rex really came back to me, what does that mean for David's plans?" Dr. Martinez had been wondering the same thing. David's authority to make decisions about his father's care was based partly on Harold's supposed mental decline and inability to live independently. If Harold's account of events proved accurate, if his recognition of Rex wasn't a delusion but reality, then David's entire argument collapsed. "Let's take this one step at a time," she said gently. "First, we confirm the dog's identity. Then, we worry about everything else." But even as she spoke the words, Dr. Martinez knew that confirmation would open a Pandora's box of legal, ethical, and family complications that would make the current situation look simple by comparison. The truth, when it finally emerged, would challenge everything everyone had assumed about loyalty, deception, and the lengths to which love could reach across time and distance. In the corridor outside, the German shepherd continued his patient vigil, unaware that his very existence was about to become the center of a storm that would test the bonds between father and son, question the nature of truth itself, and ultimately determine whether love could triumph over years of carefully constructed lies. The X-rays arrived at 2:47 a.m., transmitted electronically from Dr. Kim's veterinary practice to Casper Regional's digital imaging system. Dr. Martinez had been dozing in the break room when her phone buzzed with the notification, and she immediately made her way to the radiology department where the night technician was already pulling up the images. "These are the films from the Henderson dog," the technician explained, pointing to the screen. "And here are the records you requested from Harold Whitman's veterinary file from 3 years ago." Dr. Martinez stared at the two sets of X-rays displayed side by side on the high-resolution monitors. Even to her untrained eye, the similarities were unmistakable. The slight irregularity in the left front leg bone was identical in both images, as was the distinctive curve of the rib cage and the particular way the hip joints were positioned. "Is it a match?" she asked the technician. "I'm not a veterinary radiologist, but these bone structures are remarkably similar. The old fracture pattern is identical. Same location, same healing characteristics. If these are from different dogs, they'd have to have suffered nearly identical injuries at similar ages." Dr. Martinez felt her worldview shifting as the implications sank in. The German shepherd waiting outside the ICU wasn't just a stray that resembled Harold's deceased pet. It was Harold's pet, returned after 2 years of survival in the wilderness and captivity with another family. She immediately called Emma Rodriguez at home, waking the nurse from deep sleep. "Emma, I need you to come in early. The X-rays confirm it. The dog is Rex." "Are you serious?" Emma's voice carried a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. "Dead serious. I need you to contact the Henderson family first thing in the morning and get their full story. Then we need to figure out how to break this news to Harold and his son." "What about the hospital administration? They're already nervous about the media attention." Dr. Martinez had been dreading that conversation. "I'll handle administration. This changes everything about Harold's case, and they need to understand the legal and ethical implications." She spent the rest of the night documenting everything: the X-ray comparison, the timeline of Rex's disappearance and reappearance, the correlation between the dog's behavior and Harold's vital signs. By dawn, she had assembled a file that would either vindicate Harold's claims or end her career for pursuing an impossible theory. At 6:15 a.m., David Whitman arrived at the hospital carrying a large coffee and a folder full of legal documents. He'd spent the night researching assisted living facilities and had appointments scheduled with 3 different attorneys who specialized in elder care issues. "How's Dad doing?" he asked Dr. Martinez as she intercepted him in the lobby. "Stable, but we need to talk. There have been some developments." David followed her to a small conference room, clearly expecting to discuss his father's deteriorating condition and the need for long-term care decisions. Instead, Dr. Martinez spread the X-ray comparisons across the table, along with her documentation of the previous day's events. "David, the dog outside this hospital is Rex. These X-rays prove it conclusively." David stared at the images for several long moments, his confident demeanor slowly cracking. "That's impossible." Rex fell off Devil's Canyon. Nothing could survive that fall. Apparently something did. The Henderson family found a German Shepherd 18 months ago, exactly where and when you'd expect if Rex had survived the fall and spent months recovering in the wilderness. The vet records match perfectly. Even if that's true, David said, his voice defensive, it doesn't change the fact that Dad can't live alone anymore. This whole episode proves he's not capable of making sound decisions about his safety. Dr. Martinez leaned back in her chair, studying David's face carefully. Actually, it proves the opposite. Your father's account of events has been accurate in every detail. He recognized his own dog when no one else believed it was possible. His emotional responses have been entirely appropriate for someone reunited with a beloved pet, thought to be dead. You don't understand the full situation, David protested. Dad's been declining for 2 years. The isolation, the obsession with Rex's disappearance, the refusal to maintain his property, the depression and isolation that resulted from being lied to about his dog's death. The words hit David like a physical blow. His face flushed red, and for the first time since arriving at the hospital, his carefully controlled composure began to crack. I did what I thought was best, he said quietly. Dad was spending everything on search and rescue teams. He wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, wasn't taking care of himself. I needed him to accept reality and move on. Whose reality, David? Yours or his? The silence stretched between them as David struggled with the implications of what he'd done. Dr. Martinez had seen family dynamics play out in hospital settings many times, but rarely with such clear lines between truth and deception. There's something else you need to know, she continued. I've contacted our hospital's patient advocate and our ethics committee. Given that your authority to make medical decisions for your father was based partly on assumptions about his mental competence, and given that those assumptions now appear to be false, we need to reassess the entire situation. David's professional instincts kicked in. Are you questioning my legal standing as next of kin? I'm questioning whether your father is actually as incapacitated as you've claimed. A competent adult has the right to make his own medical decisions regardless of what family members think is best for him. At 7:30 a.m., Emma Rodriguez arrived with a detailed report from her conversation with Margaret Henderson, the woman who had cared for Rex, then called Duke, for over a year. Mrs. Henderson says Duke was the smartest dog she'd ever seen, Emma reported to Dr. Martinez and David. House-trained immediately, knew commands he'd never been taught, but always seemed like he was waiting for someone. She said he would sit by their front gate for hours, watching the road like he expected someone to come for him. What happened when he disappeared? Dr. Martinez asked. He'd been getting more restless over the past few months. Started wandering farther from their property, always in the same direction, toward Harold's area. One morning, he was just gone. They searched for weeks. But Margaret said she always suspected he'd gone home to find his real family. David listened to the report with growing agitation. Even if all of this is true, it doesn't change the practical realities. Dad is 68 years old, living alone on 40 acres with no close neighbors. What happens the next time he has a medical emergency? Maybe that's a decision Harold should make for himself, Dr. Martinez suggested. And if he makes the wrong decision, if he dies out there because he's too stubborn to accept help, then that's his choice to make, assuming he's mentally competent to make it. The debate was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway outside. Through the conference room's glass wall, they could see Rex pacing frantically near the ICU entrance, whining and scratching at the doors with obvious distress. Harold's monitors, Emma said, checking her phone for updates from the nursing station. His heart rate just spiked to 140, blood pressure's climbing too. They rushed to the ICU, where the night nurse was already adjusting Harold's medication drip. Harold was awake but clearly agitated, his eyes searching the room with growing panic. "Where's Rex?" he gasped as Dr. Martinez approached his bedside. I can feel that something's wrong. Where is he? Dr. Martinez made a decision that would have violated every protocol she'd ever learned. Emma, get security to open the ICU doors. Bring Rex in here. Dr. Martinez, that's against every... Do it now. 5 minutes later, Rex padded into the ICU with careful, respectful steps, as if understanding the gravity of the medical environment around him. The moment Harold saw him, his vital signs began to stabilize. The dog approached the bed slowly, placed his large head on the mattress where Harold could reach him, and settled into position for what was clearly going to be a long vigil. "Hey, boy," Harold whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he stroked Rex's fur. "I thought I'd lost you again." David stood in the doorway, watching the reunion with an expression of profound conflict. The evidence was overwhelming, the bond between his father and the dog undeniable, but accepting it meant confronting 2 years of lies and the devastating impact those lies had had on his father's life. Dr. Martinez approached him quietly. "David, your father needs to know the truth about what happened 2 years ago." "All of it. It'll destroy him," David whispered. "Not knowing the truth has been destroying him for 2 years. At least now he can begin to heal." As the morning light streamed through the ICU windows, illuminating the peaceful scene of man and dog reunited at last, everyone in the room understood that the hardest conversation was still ahead. The truth, when it finally emerged, would either tear the Whitman family apart forever or provide the foundation for forgiveness and genuine healing. But first, Harold needed to recover his strength, and Rex needed to complete the vigil he had maintained for 48 hours. The reckoning could wait a little longer. 3 days later, Harold was strong enough to sit up in bed and have the conversation that would change everything. Dr. Martinez had insisted on being present, both as his physician and as a witness to what she suspected would be a difficult revelation. Rex lay on a hospital blanket beside the bed, his head resting on his paws but his amber eyes alert and focused on Harold's face. David sat in the visitor's chair, his expensive suit wrinkled from spending the previous night in the hospital. He'd been dreading this moment since Dr. Martinez had confronted him with the X-ray evidence, but he knew there was no way to avoid it any longer. "Dad," David began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "We need to talk about what happened 2 years ago when Rex disappeared." Harold looked up from where he was gently stroking Rex's ears. "What about it?" "You found his collar near Devil's Canyon and took care of the burial while I was too upset to handle it myself." The simple trust in his father's voice made David's next words even more difficult. "That's not exactly what happened, Dad." Dr. Martinez watched Harold's expression carefully, ready to intervene if the shock proved too much for his recovering heart. Harold's hand stilled on Rex's head, and the dog seemed to sense the tension in the room, raising his head to look between the two men. "What do you mean that's not what happened?" David took a deep breath. "I did find Rex's collar near the cliff, torn and bloody, but I never found his body. I assumed he'd fallen and died, and I thought it would be easier for you if you believed we'd laid him to rest properly." The silence that followed was profound. Harold stared at his son for several long moments, processing the implications of what he'd just heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You lied to me? I was trying to protect you. Dad, you were falling apart. You'd spent $15,000 on search and rescue teams. You weren't eating, you weren't sleeping. I needed you to accept that Rex was gone so you could start healing." Harold's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, understanding, and finally, a deep hurt that was painful to witness. "You let me grieve for a dog that wasn't dead. You let me blame myself for losing him. You let me live with that guilt for 2 years. Dad, I'm sorry. You thought what was best for me without asking what I wanted." Harold's voice was gaining strength, and Rex lifted his head higher, sensing his master's distress. "Do you have any idea what these 2 years have been like? The nightmares about Rex falling? The guilt about not being able to save him? The emptiness of thinking I'd failed the one living thing that depended on me?" David's carefully constructed justifications began to crumble under his father's pain. "I was trying to help you move on. The property is too much for you to handle alone, and I thought if you weren't obsessing over Rex, you might consider other living arrangements." The pieces suddenly clicked into place for Harold. "This was about the property. You wanted me in assisted living so you could sell the land." "That's not—" David started, then stopped. The truth was written across his face, and lying further would only make things worse. "The land is worth a lot of money, Dad. The mineral rights alone could set you up comfortably for the rest of your life. But not if you're determined to die alone in that cabin." Dr. Martinez had heard enough family conflicts to recognize the toxic dynamics at play. But this situation was particularly heartbreaking because of its long duration and devastating impact. "Harold, how do you feel physically right now? Any chest pain or difficulty breathing?" Harold assessed himself carefully. "Angry, hurt, but not sick. If anything, I feel stronger than I have in months." He looked down at Rex, who had moved closer and was resting his chin on Harold's arm. "Having him back makes everything seem possible again." "Dad, please listen," David pleaded. "Even if I handled things wrong, the basic concerns haven't changed. You're 68 years old, living alone in a remote area with no cell service. What happens the next time you have a medical emergency?" "Maybe Rex will save me again," Harold said with a bitter smile. "He seems better at looking out for me than my own son." The accusation hit David like a physical blow. But before he could respond, Emma Rodriguez appeared in the doorway with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Mr. Whitman, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here who wants to meet you." Margaret Henderson, the woman who cared for Rex for the past year and a half. Margaret Henderson was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and hands that showed a lifetime of outdoor work. She approached Harold's bed with obvious emotion, Rex immediately recognizing her and wagging his tail enthusiastically. "Duke!" she exclaimed, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, Rex. I've been calling him Duke for so long it's become habit." She turned to Harold with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Whitman, I can't tell you how happy I am to see him with his real family again." "Mrs. Henderson, thank you for taking care of him," Harold said, his voice thick with gratitude. "Can you tell me what he was like while he was with you?" Margaret pulled up another chair, clearly prepared for a long conversation. "He was the smartest, most well-behaved dog I've ever seen, but he was also the saddest. You could tell he was missing someone terribly. He'd sit by our front gate for hours every day watching the road like he was waiting for you to come get him." "How did you find him?" "My husband Frank was checking fence line about 50 miles from here when he spotted this German shepherd wandering along the creek bottom. The poor thing was skin and bones, had some healing injuries from what looked like a bad fall, but he was alert and responsive. We brought him home, fed him up, took him to the vet." Harold absorbed every detail, building a picture of Rex's survival and recovery that made his own grief over the past 2 years even more poignant. "When did he start trying to leave?" "About 6 months ago, he started getting restless. Would disappear for days at a time, always heading in the same direction. Frank and I figured he was looking for his original family, but we didn't know how to help him find you." Margaret looked at David with curiosity. "Didn't you folks put up missing dog posters or contact the shelters when he first disappeared?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, realizing that Margaret's innocent question had exposed another layer of his deception. "We thought he was dead," David said weakly. Harold's eyes narrowed as he processed this new information. "David, did you even try to find him? Did you contact shelters or veterinarians or put up posters?" "Dad!" I found his bloody collar at the bottom of a 200-foot cliff. What was I supposed to think? You were supposed to hope! Harold's voice rose for the first time since his heart attack, and Rex immediately moved closer, providing comfort. You were supposed to search every possibility until you knew for sure. That's what you do when you love someone. Margaret Henderson looked between father and son with growing understanding. Mr. Whitman, if you don't mind me asking, how long did you search before you found the collar? 3 days, Harold replied. David called off the official search after 3 days. Margaret's expression shifted to one of gentle reproach as she looked at David. Son, dogs have survived in worse conditions for much longer than 3 days. Rex lived wild for at least 6 months before we found him. If you'd kept looking, if you'd contacted the right people, you might have found him yourself. The weight of missed opportunities and lost time settled over the room like a physical presence. 2 years of unnecessary grief, depression, and family conflict, all because David had chosen the path of expedient assumption rather than persistent hope. Dr. Martinez realized that the conversation had reached a crucial turning point. Harold, given everything you've learned today, what do you want to do about your living situation? David's concerns about your safety aren't entirely without merit. Harold looked at Rex, then at Margaret Henderson, and finally at his son. When he spoke, his voice carried a strength and clarity that had been absent for 2 years. I want to go home, to my land with my dog, and I want David to understand that some things are more important than money or convenience or even safety. Rex survived 2 years of wilderness and captivity to find his way back to me. The least I can do is have faith that we can take care of each other. The reunion was complete, but the healing had only just begun. The truth had finally emerged, devastating and liberating in equal measure, setting the stage for either reconciliation or permanent fracture between father and son. 6 weeks later, Harold stood on his front porch watching Rex chase a tennis ball across the meadow with the enthusiasm of a dog half his age. The Wyoming autumn had painted the landscape in brilliant golds and reds, and for the first time in 2 years, Harold felt truly alive. The weeks following his discharge from the hospital had been filled with difficult conversations, legal consultations, and slowly rebuilding trust between father and son. David had struggled with guilt over his deception, but gradually came to understand that his father's happiness wasn't something he could engineer or control. "Dad, you sure you don't want me to stay another day?" David called from the doorway, his overnight bag in hand. These weekly visits had become their new routine, a compromise that allowed David to check on his father's well-being while respecting Harold's independence. "We'll be fine," Harold replied, scratching behind Rex's ears as the dog returned with the ball. "Rex is better than any medical alert system you could buy. He knows when something's wrong before I do." It was true. In the weeks since their reunion, Rex had demonstrated an uncanny ability to sense Harold's physical and emotional state. When Harold's blood pressure spiked during a particularly stressful phone call with his insurance company, Rex had immediately fetched Harold's medication bottle. When Harold had experienced chest tightness during a walk, Rex had guided him back to the house and refused to leave his side until Harold felt better. "The new cell phone tower should be operational within a month," David said, still struggling with his need to solve problems through technology. "And I've arranged for Mrs. Peterson to check on you twice a week when she delivers groceries." Harold nodded, understanding that David's concern came from love, even if it was expressed through worry and contingency planning. "Son, I know this is hard for you to accept, but Rex and I have been taking care of each other for a long time. We know how to handle whatever comes. Doctor." Martinez had been amazed by Harold's recovery. His cardiac function had improved dramatically once his depression lifted, and his overall health markers were better than they'd been in years. She'd privately told David that Harold might well live another decade or more if he maintained his current emotional stability. The media attention had eventually died down, but not before the story of Harold and Rex had touched hearts across the country. Letters and emails poured in from people sharing their own stories of pet loyalty and family reconciliation. A local news station had done a follow-up piece showing Harold and Rex working together in their vegetable garden, the bond between them obvious to anyone watching. Margaret Henderson had become a regular visitor, bringing homemade casseroles and stories about Rex's time with her family. She'd also brought photo albums documenting Rex's gradual transformation from a wounded stray to a healthy, well-cared-for dog who never quite stopped looking for home. "You know what the strangest part is?" Margaret had said during one visit. "Duke, Rex, never barked while he was with us. Not once. But the day after we heard he'd found you, our neighbor called to say they'd heard a dog howling with joy somewhere in the distance. I like to think that was his way of celebrating." Tom Bradley from Animal Control had also become an unexpected friend. The experience with Rex had changed his perspective on the intelligence and emotional capacity of animals, leading him to advocate for more flexible policies regarding therapy animals in medical settings. "That dog taught me something," Tom had told Harold during a recent visit. "Sometimes what looks impossible is just improbable. And sometimes love really can overcome any obstacle." The legal issues surrounding Harold's competence and David's authority had been resolved through family mediation rather than court proceedings. Harold had agreed to regular medical checkups and a basic emergency plan, while David had agreed to respect his father's autonomy and decision-making capacity. The financial pressures that had motivated some of David's actions were also being addressed. Harold had agreed to lease the mineral rights on his property to a reputable company, providing steady income while allowing him to remain on the land. It wasn't the windfall David had envisioned, but it was enough to ensure Harold's security without forcing him to leave his home. "Rex saved my life in more ways than one," Harold had told Dr. Martinez during his most recent checkup. "Not just from the creek bed, but from the depression and isolation that were killing me slowly. Having him back gave me something to live for again." As David's car disappeared down the long gravel driveway, Harold settled into his favorite chair on the porch with Rex at his feet. The late afternoon sun painted everything in golden light, and the silence was no longer oppressive but peaceful. "What do you think, boy?" Harold asked, running his fingers through Rex's thick coat. "Should we take a walk down to the creek, check how the fence repairs are holding up?" Rex's tail wagged enthusiastically, and he bounded toward the path they'd walked together countless times before his disappearance. But this time, Harold noticed, Rex stayed closer, checking back frequently to ensure Harold was keeping up. The creek bed where Harold had spent those terrifying hours looked different in the warm afternoon light. What had seemed like a death trap now appeared as just another part of the landscape, a challenge overcome, a test survived. Harold had installed a rope ladder at the steepest part of the embankment, a practical concession to David's safety concerns that also served as a reminder of Rex's heroic journey to find help. "You know what I realized?" Harold said to Rex as they sat beside the quietly flowing water. "I spent 2 years thinking I'd failed you, when all along you were fighting to get back to me. Sometimes the people we think we've lost are just taking the long way home." Rex settled beside him, content to share the peaceful moment. The scars from his wilderness ordeal were still visible in his coat and gait, but they'd become badges of honor rather than marks of suffering. He'd survived, persevered, and ultimately triumphed through determination and love. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, Harold reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A medical emergency that could have been fatal had instead become the catalyst for reunion and healing. A family lie that had caused years of pain had ultimately led to a deeper understanding of truth and trust. "Come on, boy," Harold said, standing and brushing off his jeans. "Let's go home." They walked back to the cabin together, man and dog moving in perfect synchronization, their bond stronger for having been tested by separation and time. The porch light cast a warm glow across the yard, and inside, Harold could see the comfortable chaos of a life fully lived. Books scattered on tables, Rex's toys in a basket by the fireplace, medications organized but not obsessed over. Rex settled onto his favorite rug while Harold prepared their simple dinner. The routine was familiar yet precious, each ordinary moment a gift that might have been lost forever. As Harold set Rex's food bowl on the floor, he marveled at the simple miracle of having his companion back. Later that evening, as Harold sat in his reading chair with Rex's head resting on his lap, he thought about the letters he'd received from strangers inspired by their story. Many were from elderly people who'd found the courage to adopt pets despite their age, or from adult children who'd reconciled with parents after years of misunderstanding. "We didn't just find each other again," Harold murmured to Rex. "We found hope for a lot of other people, too." The fire crackled in the fireplace. The Wyoming wind whispered through the pine trees, and in the comfortable silence of evening, Harold felt a peace he'd thought was lost forever. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, it always did, but tonight he was exactly where he belonged, with exactly who he belonged with. Rex's breathing deepened as he drifted toward sleep, his body warm and relaxed against Harold's legs. In his dreams, perhaps he was running through familiar meadows, chasing tennis balls and rabbits, secure in the knowledge that when he woke, his beloved human would still be there. And Harold, watching the flames dance in the fireplace and feeling the steady weight of Rex's head on his lap, knew with absolute certainty that some bonds are unbreakable, some love is unconditional, and sometimes, against all odds, miracles really do come home. Message for American seniors, 200 words. Have you ever been told you're too old to hope for something wonderful? Harold Whitman thought he'd lost everything that mattered, his wife to cancer, his beloved German Shepherd Rex to a tragic accident, and his son's respect to misunderstanding. At 68, living alone on his Wyoming ranch, Harold had given up on miracles, but Rex hadn't given up on Harold. After surviving 2 years in the wilderness and captivity with another family, Rex found his way back just when Harold needed him most, leading paramedics to save Harold's life after a heart attack in a remote creek bed. The reunion revealed painful truths about family deception, but ultimately proved that love transcends time, distance, and even death itself. This isn't just a story about a man and his dog. It's about the courage to believe in second chances, the strength to forgive family betrayals, and the faith that those we love never truly leave us. Harold discovered that being too old is just an excuse others use to limit our dreams. Real love waits, endures, and always finds its way home. Discussion questions. Have you ever experienced a miracle reunion with someone or something you thought was lost forever? What did it teach you about hope? How has a beloved pet changed or saved your life during difficult times? Share your story below. We'd love to hear how animals have touched your heart.